I drove up to my father-in-law's house just before sunset. It was far from town, deep in the mountains, surrounded by trees and nothing else. He had asked me to check on a house, water his garden and flowers while he was away for 10 days. Since the house was 100 miles from my home, I decided to stay the night. It seemed easier than driving back in the dark. The house was old but well kept. It had a wooden porch, creaky floors, and large windows that looked out onto the forest. I parked my car, grabbed my bag, and went inside. It smelled like wood and something faintly sweet, like flowers from the garden. The quiet was heavy. No cars, no voices, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. After unpacking, I spent some time watering the garden. The sun was nearly gone, and shadows stretched long across the yard. The flowers seemed to glow softly in the fading light. The place was peaceful, almost too quiet. By the time I finished, it was dark, and the only light came from the porch and the stars above. I locked the doors and settled in. I had brought some snacks and a book to keep me company, but the silence was unsettling. Every creak of the house made me glance over my shoulder. I told myself it was just because I wasn't used to being alone here. I went to bed around 11 p.m. The bed in the guest room was firm, and the blankets smelled faintly of lavender. The forest outside was pitch black, and I had to keep the bedside lamp on. It made me feel less alone. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I noticed it. The light on the porch was on. It was motion activated, so something must have triggered it. My heart thumped as I lay there, staring at the glow coming through the curtains. Probably just an animal, I thought. A deer, or maybe a raccoon. But I couldn't go back to sleep without checking. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked to the front door. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me. The yard was empty. The garden was still, and the trees swayed gently in the wind. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no rustling. I looked around for a minute before heading back inside. It was nothing. I locked the door behind me and went back to bed. The second time I woke up, it was the same thing. The light on the porch was on. I felt uneasy now. Twice in one night? That wasn't normal. I got up again, heart pounding, and peeked through the curtains. The yard looked the same as before, empty. But this time I thought I heard something. A faint sound, like whispering, or maybe the wind moving through the trees. It sent chills down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door again, stepping onto the porch. The sound stopped immediately. I stood there, listening, but all I could hear was the soft rustle of leaves. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe the wind had just sounded strange. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I locked the door again and went back to bed, though it took a long time to fall asleep. The third time, I woke up gasping. I wasn't sure if it was from a nightmare or something else. The light was on again. My chest felt tight as I sat up and stared at the glowing curtains. This time, I didn't want to go outside. I told myself I didn't need to. It was probably another animal. But as I sat there, straining to hear, I thought I caught the faintest sound of footsteps outside. They were soft, slow, and deliberate. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I turned on the flashlight and sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The sound stopped, and after a few minutes, the light outside turned off again. I told myself to stay calm. It was just my nerves. The mountain air was getting to me. I lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but then it happened again. The light flicked on, and this time I heard it clearly. Footsteps on the porch. They were heavier than before, slow and deliberate. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, debating whether to call someone. I didn't want to open the door, but I felt like I had to. I crept toward it, heart pounding, and peeked through the peephole. At first, I saw nothing but the empty porch. Then, just at the edge of the light, I thought I saw a shape, tall and thin, standing just beyond the garden. I froze, unsure if I had really seen it. The light flicked off again, plunging the yard into darkness. I stood there for a long moment, unable to move. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it an animal? A person? Or was my imagination playing tricks on me? I backed away from the door and locked it again, double-checking the windows to make sure everything was secure. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch in the living room, flashlight in hand, staring at the door. Every sound made me jump. When the sun finally rose, the house felt different, less oppressive. The warm light made me feel a little braver. I stepped outside to check the yard. The flowers looked fine, and the garden was untouched. But when I looked closer at the ground near the porch, I saw them. Footprints. They were faint, but they were there. They didn't look like animal tracks. They were too big, too human. I didn't stick around to water the garden that morning. I grabbed my things, locked the house, and left as fast as I could. As I drove back down the mountain, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. I still don't know what triggered the light that night or what I heard outside. I told my father-in-law about it when he got back, but he just laughed and said the house was old and full of strange noises. I wanted to believe him, but I haven't been back to that house since. Something about that night still lingers in my mind, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Photography has always been my passion. I've loved it since my teenage years when I first picked up an old film camera my dad found at a garage sale. Over the years, it grew into something more than a hobby. It became my escape. Nature, especially the forest, was where I felt most at home. The light through the trees, the way shadows shifted, and the endless details all begged to be captured. It was perfect for me. One morning, I decided to explore a remote forest I'd heard about from another photographer. It wasn't on any tourist maps, and that's exactly what made it appealing. I could spend the whole day there, away from distractions. I packed my camera gear, extra batteries, a couple of lenses, and enough food and snacks to keep me going throughout the day. The forest was about an hour's drive from my home, so I set out early, excited for a full day of shooting. I drove through narrow, winding roads, the landscape becoming more and more isolated as I got farther from town. I parked my car at the edge of the forest, grabbed my gear, and made my way in. The air was cool and smelled of pine. The peace of the woods immediately put me at ease. There was no one around, just me, the trees, and the quiet. I wandered deeper into the forest, stopping often to take photos of the way light filtered through the branches and how the shadows stretched across the ground. The solitude felt perfect, and I wasn't in any rush. It was a beautiful day, and I had all the time I needed. After a couple of hours, I found a small clearing with fallen logs covered in moss. The golden light of late morning illuminated the scene just right. I spent some time there, snapping several shots, adjusting my lens and settings to get the perfect picture. Afterward, I took a break and pulled out a sandwich and some chips I had packed. I ate slowly, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. The forest seemed to have a quiet energy, and for a moment I felt truly alone. No distractions, no worries, just the calm of nature. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a squirrel. But then it came again, a faint sound, just behind me. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing. Probably just my imagination, I muttered to myself, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. I packed up and kept moving deeper into the woods, though the strange feeling of being watched stayed with me. I stopped occasionally to take more photos, but every time I looked around, the forest felt quieter. The silence was almost too much. A little while later, I noticed something odd. My water bottle was gone. I distinctly remembered placing it in my bag earlier, but now it wasn't there. I searched the area, thinking maybe I'd left it back where I had stopped to take photos, but it wasn't anywhere. My heart began to race. It wasn't like I had misplaced it. It was as if it had just vanished. Okay, calm down, I told myself. I grabbed my camera bag and continued on, though the uneasy feeling was growing stronger. I walked on, my thoughts distracted, until I came across a red scarf tied to a tree branch. I froze. That was my scarf, but I hadn't tied it there. I hadn't even worn it today. Confused, I grabbed the scarf and stuffed it into my bag. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Someone had to be out there. But who? I decided to turn back. The sun was starting to dip lower, and I didn't want to be in the woods after dark. As I made my way back along the trail, I felt a presence behind me. Footsteps. I stopped, listened, and heard the unmistakable sound of someone walking in the forest. The footsteps were soft, but they were there, trailing me. I looked around but saw no one. The footsteps didn't stop. They were moving closer now, matching my pace. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever it was, they were deliberately staying just out of sight. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. I tried to stay calm, but the sounds of footsteps were getting louder, closer. Panic started to rise in my chest, but I didn't dare run. The forest was dense, and I knew it would only make it harder to find my way out. Then, just ahead of me, I spotted something. My camera lens cap. It was placed carefully in the center of the trail, like a marker. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the cap, shoved it into my pocket, and began to run. The footsteps followed, now almost right behind me. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning as I sprinted toward the clearing where I had parked. Every step felt like it echoed through the trees. I didn't dare turn around. The sound of the footsteps was too close. I finally saw my car in the distance and made a beeline for it. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. I jumped inside and locked the door before starting the engine. I didn't look back as I drove out of the clearing, my heart still racing in my chest. The forest, which had once felt like a peaceful escape, now felt like a place haunted by the unknown. I haven't been back since. Every time I think about that day, I can still hear the footsteps behind me, and I wonder who or what was out there following me in the shadows. It was the summer of 2016 when my girlfriend Sarah and I decided to take a weekend getaway to the mountains. We both needed a break from the usual routine. Work had been stressful, and we were eager to get away from the noise of the city. We'd heard about a secluded forest road up in the mountains that led to a beautiful spot with great views. No crowds, no tourists, just peace and quiet. We packed up my car with snacks, drinks, and a blanket for a picnic. Sarah had brought a cooler with sandwiches, and I took my camera to snap some photos of the natural beauty. The drive was peaceful at first, with winding roads and tall trees on either side. The higher we drove, the quieter it became. Eventually, we found ourselves on a narrow forest road, far away from any signs of civilization. I parked the car in a small clearing with a perfect view of the mountains. The air was fresh, and everything around us felt calm. We set up the blanket, ate our lunch, and talked about the things we wanted to do over the summer. For a while, it was just us, the trees, and the distant sound of birds. After we ate, I grabbed my camera, eager to get a few shots of the scenery. I wandered a little further from the picnic spot, snapping pictures of the distant mountains and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. As I was focusing on a shot, I saw something that made me stop cold. There was a man standing in the trees, not far from where we were. At first, I thought he might be another hiker or someone passing through, but something about him didn't feel right. He was standing still, almost hidden among the shadows of the trees. His clothes were dark, blending in with the forest around him. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew he wasn't just a casual wanderer. I turned back to Sarah, who was still sitting on the blanket, scrolling through her phone. I didn't want to worry her, so I kept my voice calm when I spoke. "Hey Sarah, do you see that guy over there?" I asked. She looked up and scanned the trees. "What guy?" I pointed again, but this time when she looked, the man was gone. "I don't see anyone," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe it's just your imagination." I wasn't sure, but I nodded, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maybe I had imagined it. I took a few more pictures, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man. There was something unsettling about how still he had been and how he had disappeared so quickly. "Let's head back to the car," I suggested, trying to sound casual. I didn't want to alarm Sarah, but I felt like we needed to leave. We packed up our things and got into the car. I started driving slowly, not wanting to rush, but the quiet of the forest felt heavier now. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the feeling that something wasn't right. The road ahead was winding, narrow, and empty. We were completely alone, or so I thought. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. It was hard to shake the feeling that someone was watching us. And then I saw something, a figure, walking along the road behind us. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, but I quickly realized it was the same man from earlier. My heart started to race. The man was walking, not far behind our car. The road was too narrow for him to be out there by accident. I could make out his dark clothes, and I knew it was him. But why was he following us? There were no other cars or people around. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight. "There's someone behind us." She looked out the window, trying to see what I was talking about. "What do you mean?" "There's a guy. He's following us." Her eyes widened. "What do we do?" I didn't know what to do. I kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The man wasn't walking normally now. He was moving faster, keeping up with the car. I glanced in the mirror again, and he was getting closer. I pushed the car faster, hoping to get to a wider part of the road, but it seemed like no matter how much I sped up, the man was still behind us. I could hear the sound of his footsteps in my mind, even though I wasn't looking directly at him. It felt like he was right there, just out of sight. "Go, go, go!" Sarah screamed. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, and my mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. But there was no way out. The man was getting closer, too close. Finally, the road started to widen, and I could see the highway in the distance. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I didn't dare look back. I just kept driving, hoping we could make it to safety. When we finally reached the highway, I didn't slow down. I kept driving until I saw a gas station up ahead. I pulled into the parking lot and stopped the car, my hands shaking. We didn't speak at first. We just sat there, both of us trying to catch our breath. I don't know who that man was or why he followed us. But the feeling of being hunted, of knowing someone was out there, stalking us through the woods, is something I'll never forget. We didn't talk much about it after that. We just got back into the car and drove home, but neither of us could shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something much worse. We haven't been back to that forest road since, and honestly, I don't think we ever will.